The chief economist at consulting firm RSM said today, quote, "My sense here is that the U.S. economy is still likely to fall into recession given the level of simultaneous shocks that it's absorbed. All this does is postpone temporarily what will likely be a series of punitive import taxes put on U.S. trade allies." Do you agree? I mean, I guess Jamie Dimon said something similar, that he still thinks the likelihood is that there will be a recession caused by all of this.
Right. Welcome back to the Deep Dive Report Show, where, as always, we're diving right into those headlines that the mainstream media, likes to put a little spin on sometimes. Sanitize, exactly.
Yeah.
And this time we're not just looking at some absurdity, from the Trump administration, but really a dangerous display of incompetence. And this is really what we're going to kind of pull back the curtain on today. So we're looking at a very specific 24-hour period, and we're going to really go deep here into a period where we saw these tariff threats followed by this utterly transparent pause. And I think this is a perfect illustration of just how chaotic and reactionary this administration truly is.
Absolutely.
The evidence today comes straight from a number of different excerpts that we have.
Yeah.
And these excerpts are going to lay bare, I think, really the recklessness of this administration's economic policies.
Absolutely.
And the spinelessness, really, of their enablers.
Right.
So what are we going to do here today?
Well, we're going to not just recount the events, but we really want to try to illuminate the underlying mechanisms of this chaos.
Right.
So we'll trace the sequence of this policy whiplash,
Okay.
analyze the predictable yet telling reactions from across the political spectrum,
Okay.
and crucially reveal the profound implications of this kind of erratic governance.
Right.
This wasn't a display of strategic brilliance. It was a stark exposure of volatility and a fundamental lack of seriousness at the highest levels of power.
All right, so let's unpack this.
Okay. Yeah.
This latest episode of economic, we call it buffoonery, I guess?
Yeah.
So Donald Trump, right, Mr. Disruptor himself, hurls this threat of sweeping tariffs into the global marketplace, right?
Right into it.
And immediately we see the predictable tremors.
Yeah.
Markets wobble, businesses are bracing for impact.
Yeah.
Then with no clear rationale, no strategic announcement, just poof, a pause.
Yeah.
This isn't leadership, right?
No.
This is like a sugar rush followed by a crash, leaving everyone else to clean up the mess.
Well, and what's fascinating here is what triggered that sudden, lull in the storm, right? It wasn't some, embrace of sound economic policy all of a sudden.
Right.
It was the unmistakable sound of panic rising to a fever pitch, even within the Republican Party ranks.
That's it.
So this wasn't a calculated maneuver, right? This was a direct response to this intense pressure created by his own reckless actions.
And speaking of those Republicans,
Yeah.
Let's look at the reaction from the Senate.
Right.
We're hearing reports of relief, even cheers,
Right. Yeah.
smiles.
Yeah.
Let that sink in for a moment.
Interesting, isn't it?
These are individuals that have consistently rubber-stamped
Yeah.
Trump's agenda,
Yeah.
often at the expense of sound economic principles.
Of course.
But now at the first hint that these policies are potentially backfiring
Right.
spectacularly on their own constituents,
Right.
this temporary pause is met with open celebration.
Oh, yeah.
You almost have to ask, where was this enthusiasm for stability
Sure.
and reasoned policy before the 11th hour?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, their relief isn't born of a conversion to responsible governance.
Right.
It's rooted in, pure self-interest.
Right.
I mean, the looming prospect of real economic fallout in their states.
Yeah.
That's the language they understand.
Yeah.
They have largely enabled Trump's erratic behavior, and now they are breathing a sigh of relief
Yeah.
that he has, momentarily asserted a disaster of his own making.
Yeah.
I mean, this isn't principled opposition. This is political triage at its finest.
So here's where it gets really kind of revealing.
Okay.
We have the spectacle of Trump's own trade representative,
Right.
Jameson Greer, testifying before Congress,
Right.
earnestly defending the tariff policies
Yeah.
that Trump was at that very moment in the process of reversing,
Oh, wow.
completely and utterly in the dark.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Congressman Tom Swati aptly described it as a switcheroo, not a coherent strategy,
Right.
but sheer, unadulterated chaos.
I mean, so what does this tell us, right?
Yeah.
What does it say when the point person on a crucial economic issue
Right.
is so completely out of the loop,
Yeah.
it underscores a breakdown in communication.
Yeah.
right? A profound lack of internal coordination.
Yeah.
It suggests that decision-making is happening impulsively
Yeah.
without even consulting, the relevant experts within the administration itself.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, the level of hypocrisy is just truly staggering.
Yeah.
Just days before this about face.
Right.
We have Republicans like Tom Tillis issuing these tough pronouncements,
Sure.
wanting to know who would be held accountable for the impending economic damage.
Right.
Strong rhetoric.
Right. Strong words.
But the instant Trump hits the pause button,
Yeah.
suddenly it's all relieved smiles and pathetic praise
Yeah.
for his so-called unpredictability.
Right.
I mean, where did that outrage vanish? Principles are entirely disposable when their own political survival is on the line.
Well, the primary driver behind this abrupt shift was not a newfound commitment to the public good.
Right.
It was fear.
Right.
I mean, fear of the markets plummeting, fear of voter backlash at the ballot box, and perhaps most significantly, fear of crossing Donald Trump.
Right.
So their tough talk was merely performative posturing.
Sure.
Their relief is palpable and entirely self-serving.
So let's be absolutely clear.
Okay.
This temporary pause is not some stroke of diplomatic genius.
Right.
It's not some cunning strategic maneuver.
Yeah.
It is impulsive decision-making driven by panic and a desperate attempt at political self-preservation.
Right.
This brief respite does nothing to address the underlying instability,
Right.
the inherent danger of having a leader
Yeah.
who governs by whim and impulse, playing games of the American economy, and are standing on the world stage.
Precisely. I mean, a momentary cessation of self-inflicted harm is not the same as establishing a responsible and sustainable policy framework.
Right.
Right. The fundamental issues remain unresolved, and the potential for further, erratic and damaging decisions continues to cast a shadow.
So let's walk through the timeline here.
Okay.
Okay, so we've got Trump barreling forward with these reckless tariff threats,
Right.
sending shockwaves through the economy.
Yeah.
Then seemingly out of nowhere, the news breaks.
Right.
Conveniently during a luncheon with a room full of increasingly anxious Republican senators.
Of course. Of course.
A 90-day pause on tariffs for most nations.
Right.
Notably absent from that list of nations receiving a reprieve, China.
Right.
So this wasn't a broad de-escalation.
Yeah.
It was a targeted and likely politically motivated partial retreat.
Right. And the reason for that GOP panic is vital to understand.
Yeah.
It wasn't abstract economic theory
Yeah.
causing their anxiety. It was the very real prospect of a looming recession.
Right.
A volatile stock market wiping out their constituent savings.
Yeah.
American manufacturers facing crippling cost increases.
Yeah.
And their Senate offices being inundated with pleas from businesses, teetering on the brink.
Right.
The pressure they were facing was undeniable.
I mean, you can almost picture it, right?
Oh, yeah.
These Republicans finally feeling the heat from back home,
Yeah.
desperately seeking a way out.
Right.
They're in Senate hearings practically begging Trump's officials
Yeah.
for a lifeline, voicing carefully worded concerns about the potential economic fallout.
Sure.
And, of course, direct criticism of Trump himself is largely avoided.
Of course.
Instead, they try to deflect blame onto his advisors.
Right.
Or vaguely call for negotiations.
Right.
All while showering Trump with insincere praise for his supposed vision.
Yeah.
A pathetic display.
Well, and it's crucial to remember that the trade war with China remained very much in effect.
Oh, absolutely.
This partial pause was not a signal of a fundamental shift or a move towards genuine de-escalation.
Right.
It was a limited and temporary pullback on certain fronts while the core trade conflict continued.
Right.
So this offered a sliver of temporary relief, not a lasting resolution.
And what this whole sorry episode really revealed are the cracks in the facade of this Magi-A.
Right.
When their own political futures and the economic well-being of their states were threatened,
Yeah.
some Republicans were finally compelled to push back,
Right.
however reluctantly and belatedly.
It wasn't a sudden awakening of principle, though, was it?
Not at all.
It was a pragmatic self-preservationist response
Okay.
to immediate danger.
Right.
And that's a critical distinction to grasp.
Right.
We must not interpret this cessation of tariff threats as evidence of a return to responsible governance.
Right.
It's a symptom of this ongoing dysfunction,
Right.
a fleeting moment of damage control driven by acute fear, not by genuine, lasting commitment to sound policymaking.
So let's move on to the receipts, as they say.
No, let's do it.
Exhibit A, the breathtaking hypocrisy of Senator Tom Tillis. One moment, he's expressing outrage over the potential economic devastation.
Right.
The next, he's practically giddy with relief because Trump press the pause button.
Interesting.
Senator, where did that righteous indignation disappear to?
Yeah.
Did it simply evaporate the instant your own reelection prospects looked slightly less dire?
Well, the hypocrisy is stark and deeply revealing,
Wow.
and it highlights this alarming degree to which political expediency has come to supersede stated principles within the Republican Party.
Right.
Their expressions of concern appear to be entirely performative, while their relief is opportunistic and speaks volumes about their true priorities.
Okay. Exhibit B.
Right.
The sheer, unadulterated internal chaos of this administration.
Yeah.
As we've already highlighted, the fact that Trump's own trade representative
Right.
was left completely in the dark,
Yeah.
while testifying about the very policies being reversed, is astounding.
It really is.
Congressman Sweezy's description, a switcheroo,
Yeah.
not a plan.
Yeah.
Just chaos perfectly encapsulates the situation.
Absolutely.
This isn't some intricate strategic unpredictability.
Right.
It's a fundamental lack of basic competence.
Well, Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer accurately characterized this as government by chaos,
Right.
underscoring the constant internal contradictions
Right.
and the day-to-day policy shifts driven by impulse rather than deliberation.
Yeah.
And what's truly disturbing is that the Republican response was not one of denial or embarrassment,
Right.
but in some quarters even applause
Right.
for this supposed unpredictability.
Which brings us to Exhibit C,
Okay.
courtesy of Senator Kevin Cramer. Desperately trying to spin this mess into some kind of strategic brilliance.
Oh, yeah.
He actually posited that Trump's unpredictability serves as leverage,
Right.
that this internal disarray is all part of some grand 5D chess move.
Wow.
No, Senator.
Yeah.
It's dysfunction.
Right.
It's amateur hour.
It is.
And it's profoundly dangerous for the American people.
Well, the argument that unpredictability equates to effective leverage is a profoundly flawed one.
Yeah.
Incoherent policy creates instability, erodes confidence both domestically and internationally, and ultimately undermines any potential negotiating position.
Right.
It is not a sign of strength or strategic thinking. It is a recipe for economic and diplomatic disaster.
Okay, Exhibit D.
Let's hear it.
Let's be clear. Trump did not suddenly reverse course because of some brilliant flash of insight
Right.
or a newfound commitment to sound economics.
Of course not.
He caved to pressure, plain and simple.
Right.
Reporting at the time indicated that this pause only came after significant and sustained urging, bordering on outright pleading from within his own party.
Interesting.
Remember that Fox News interview?
I do.
GOP senators practically begging Trump to reach a deal
Right.
and halt the self-inflicted economic damage.
Well, Senator John Kennedy's analogy of Trump as a pit bull who caught the car is particularly insightful. It's a tacit admission that Trump initiated a course of action without any real understanding of the potential consequences.
Yeah.
And his subsequent desperate hope that Trump would take the deal reveals a significant lack of confidence
Right.
within the Republican Party regarding Trump's handling of trade policy. And finally, Exhibit E.
No?
Perhaps the most telling sign of a complete lack of confidence.
All right.
While Republican leadership was publicly attempting to placate Trump,
Right.
behind the scenes, veteran Senator Chuck Grassley and a bipartisan group of colleagues were actively working on legislation aimed at stripping the president of his unilateral tariff power
Interesting.
and restoring that authority to the legislative branch.
Wow.
That is not the action of a party that trusts its leader's judgment.
Well, their motivation was unambiguous.
Yeah.
A fundamental distrust of Trump's erratic and damaging approach to trade, and a recognition of the urgent need to reassert constitutional checks and balances.
Right.
This is a direct and significant challenge to Trump's unchecked executive authority. And how did Trump, the self-proclaimed master negotiator and deal maker, react to this attempt at congressional oversight?
I'm sure it was measured.
Predictably, he lashed out, attacking these Republicans as rebel Republicans who simply want a grandstand.
Right.
The underlying message is clear.
Yeah.
He believes he should possess absolute and unquestionable power regardless of the consequences.
Well, this episode laid bare a significant fracture within the Republican Party.
Yeah.
You had party leaders like John Thune publicly urging patience,
Right.
offering tepid defenses of Trump's actions,
Right.
while a growing number of rank-and-file members were actively seeking to rein in the president's power and reclaim the constitutional authority of Congress.
Right.
The internal conflict was palpable.
And the final nail in the coffin of this manufactured relief narrative.
Okay.
Even after the supposed victory of this 90-day pause,
Yeah.
key Republicans like Tom Tillis were forced to admit the obvious truth.
What's that?
A temporary reprieve doesn't do much for certainty, and certainly wouldn't advise businesses to make long-term investment decisions
Of course not.
based on this fleeting moment of calm.
Yeah.
So much for the cheering and the smiles.
Right.
They understand that this is far from over.
The fundamental takeaway here is that this was not a solution.
Right.
It was a temporary suspension of a self-inflicted wound.
Right.
The underlying instability and the very real potential for future chaotic decisions remain a clear and present danger.
So let's call this what it is: a pathetic display of failed leadership and rank political cowardice.
Yeah.
Threatening to destabilize the global economy on a whim,
Right.
causing widespread fear and uncertainty
Oh.
for American workers and businesses,
Yeah.
only to abruptly backpedal when your own party starts to panic about the electoral fallout,
Of course.
and then to have those same enablers applaud your panicked retreat as some kind of strategic victory.
Yeah.
It is a disgrace. It is a betrayal of the public trust.
This isn't just government by chaos, it's governance as chaos.
Right.
A deliberate pattern of manufactured crisis designed to distract, disrupt, and ultimately consolidate power,
Yeah.
with devastating consequences for American jobs, the prices we pay,
Right.
and our collective financial security.
This whole episode lays bare the true nature of modern republicanism under Donald Trump.
It does.
It is not rooted in strength. It is defined by erratic impulses.
Right.
It is not driven by coherent strategy. It is characterized by reactive panic.
Right.
It is not an exercise in responsible leadership. It is a dangerous cocktail of narcissism and profound incompetence.
Yes.
Fueled by fear and enabled by widespread complicity.
Absolutely.
They want you to believe in a master negotiator, a fearless leader.
Right.
What we have witnessed is an emperor with no clothes,
Yeah.
dangerously unpredictable, leading a party that consistently prioritizes personal loyalty
Right.
over the well-being of the nation.
Do not be deceived by this temporary pause.
Right.
This predictable cycle of reckless threats followed by panicked backtracking and a relentless political spin is not an anomaly. It is the strategy.
Right.
It is a calculated erosion of established norms, a constant state of manufactured instability designed to keep us all off balance and to obscure the fundamental recklessness and lack of vision at the heart of this administration.
Yeah.
The underlying disregard for expertise,
Right.
the governance by Twitter tantrum, none of that has changed.
Right.
The threat hasn't vanished. It has simply been temporarily delayed.
Right.
This is not a sustainable model of governance.
Right.
This is not acceptable for a nation that prides itself on stability and leadership.
Right.
The power to alter this dangerous trajectory ultimately lies with you, the informed citizen.
Right.
Demand accountability, reject the normalization of chaos, and recognize that the long-term health of our democracy and the stability of our economy depend on rejecting this kind of erratic and self-serving leadership.
That's all the time we have for this deep dive into the latest Trumpian meltdown, but make absolutely sure you keep listening to the Deep Dive Report Show for the unvarnished truth and the analysis the mainstream media won't give you. Hit that like button on this video right now, subscribe to our channel so you never miss an expose, and click that notification icon to stay informed. We'll catch them in the next breaking news story.